Slap. The sound exploded to the private jet, and in that single second, every conversation died. A black woman, in a simple gray coat, stood frozen near the cabin entrance, her hand pressed against her cheek, while a flight attendant stared back at her with cold authority. Passengers gasped. Some reached for their phones. Others looked away in disbelief, because what had just happened didn't feel real. The flight attendant had slapped her right there in front of everyone. And his reason? He believed she didn't belong. What he saw was a quiet woman with no diamonds, no designer labels, no security team, no signs of power. Just someone he thought was in the wrong place. But what he didn't know would change his life forever, because this wasn't an ordinary passenger, and this wasn't an ordinary flight. For the next 10 minutes, tension would choke the entire cabin. Passengers would sit frozen. Executives would panic. And one shocking truth would bring the luxury jet to a complete standstill before it ever left the runway. But here's the part that stunned everyone. The woman he humiliated, the woman he judged, the woman he slapped without asking a single question, owned the jet, yes, the aircraft, the company, and possibly his future. But this story is bigger than revenge, because what happened on that plane exposed something painful. How quickly people judge, how easily power gets abused, and how dangerous assumptions can become. The flight attendant thought he was protecting authority. Instead, he was destroying his own career. So what exactly pushed him to cross that line? Why did the woman stay so calm after being slapped? And what happened 10 minutes later that left an entire crew terrified and passengers speechless? Stay with me, because this story doesn't begin with power. It begins with humiliation and ends with a lesson nobody on that jet would ever forget. Slap! The sharp sound cracked through the luxury jet like thunder. For one frozen second, time itself seemed to stop. Conversations died instantly. Crystal glasses trembled on polished tables. The quiet hum of the aircraft suddenly felt louder than ever. Every passenger turned toward the entrance. Standing near the doorway of the private jet was a black woman in a simple gray coat, one hand slowly rising to her cheek. Her breathing remained steady, but shock flashed across her face. The red mark forming on her skin told the story before anyone spoke. In front of her stood Flight Attendant Daniel Carter, his jaw tight and his chest rising with anger. "I warned you," he said coldly. The cabin sank into uncomfortable silence. Some passengers looked horrified, others looked away, and a few simply stared, unsure whether they had actually seen what they thought they had seen. The woman blinked once. Then again, her fingers remained pressed against her cheek, as if she were still trying to understand what had just happened. "You slapped me," she said quietly. Daniel crossed his arms. "I said restricted areas are off limits." His voice carried the confidence of someone who believed he had done nothing wrong. Several passengers exchanged uneasy looks. One businessman, sitting near the front, removed his glasses. A woman seated across the aisle whispered to her companion, "Did he seriously just hit her?" No one answered. The atmosphere inside the aircraft turned painfully tense. The private jet itself was breathtaking. Cream leather seats, polished walnut finishes, soft golden lighting, and wide windows reflecting the sunrise outside. It looked more like a flying executive lounge than an airplane. But in that moment, none of the luxury mattered. The tension had swallowed everything. The woman lowered her hand slowly. She stood with remarkable calm. No shouting, no panic, no dramatic reaction, just quiet disbelief. And somehow, that calmness unsettled the passengers even more. Her name was Amara Johnson, yet to everyone watching, she appeared to be nothing more than an unfamiliar passenger. She wore no expensive diamonds, no flashy designer clothing, no visible signs of wealth. Her gray coat looked elegant but modest, paired with dark trousers and low heels practical enough for travel. Her hair was neatly tied back, and she carried only a small leather bag over one shoulder. Nothing about her matched the image many people expected on a private executive jet. And Daniel Carter had noticed that immediately. Earlier that morning, the private terminal buzzed with activity. Ground crews moved carefully across the runway, while luxury cars delivered high-profile passengers to the aircraft. This was not an ordinary flight. The jet belonged to Skirich Aviation, a rapidly growing private charter company known for transporting executives, investors, and elite clients. Daniel had worked aboard these flights for nearly 3 years. He prided himself on maintaining order. To him, luxury aviation required strict standards. Appearance mattered. Behavior mattered. And most importantly, he believed he could instantly recognize who belonged. As passengers boarded, Daniel greeted them with practiced professionalism. "Welcome aboard." "Good morning, sir." "Right this way." He recognized several regular executives immediately. Expensive watches, tailored suits, confident attitudes. Exactly the type of people he expected. Then he saw Amara. She entered quietly through the terminal entrance while speaking briefly with airport staff. No assistant followed her. No security detail. No crowd surrounded her. And that bothered him. Daniel watched her closely. Something about her presence irritated him. Not because she caused trouble, but because she didn't fit the picture in his mind. He noticed the simple coat, the lack of luxury accessories, the single travel bag. His suspicion quietly grew. One of the ground staff appeared ready to say something to him about her, but a radio call interrupted the conversation. Daniel never waited for clarification. Instead, he made his own assumptions. Now, standing inside the cabin after the slap, those assumptions hung heavily in the air. Amara looked directly at him. Her voice remained controlled. "You could have spoken to me." Daniel's expression hardened. "I did speak to you. You touched me first. You refused instructions." A murmur moved through the cabin. Passengers were listening carefully now. Daniel straightened his uniform jacket. His badge reflected the cabin lights. From his perspective, the situation was simple. He believed he had protected security procedures. He believed he had maintained authority. And most dangerously, he believed he was justified. Near the rear of the cabin, an elderly passenger shifted uncomfortably. "This feels wrong," he muttered. Another passenger quietly reached for her phone beneath the table. The atmosphere had become impossible to ignore. Outside the aircraft windows, airport crews continued their work, unaware of the storm building inside. Amara glanced toward the back section of the jet. Only moments earlier, she had attempted to walk there. Daniel had immediately blocked her path. "Passenger seating is forward," he had told her. "I know," she replied calmly. "Then please return to your assigned seat. I only need to check something." Restricted access. His tone had sharpened. Passengers nearby began noticing the exchange. Amara remained polite. "It will take a moment." But Daniel interpreted her calmness as defiance. He stepped closer. "Ma'am, you need to follow instructions." She looked directly at him. "And you need to stop assuming." The word struck his pride. Without thinking clearly, he reached toward her arm. Amara pulled away. "Don't touch me." And then, the slap. Now the memory replayed painfully inside the silent cabin. Daniel still stood firm, still convinced, still unaware of the disaster unfolding around him. Amara looked at him for a long moment. Then she spoke words that caused several passengers to glance nervously at one another. "You should have asked who I was first." Daniel gave a short laugh. "And who exactly are you?" Her eyes never left his. The calm in her voice carried something difficult to explain. Disappointment, perhaps, or warning. "You'll know soon enough." And suddenly, for reasons he could not explain, Daniel felt the first cold hint of unease. The morning sun reflected across the polished body of the private jet, making it shine like silver against the runway. From the outside, the aircraft looked calm and magnificent. Inside, however, the atmosphere had changed completely. The sound of the slap still lingered in people's minds. Passengers sat frozen in their cream leather seats, unsure how to react. No one returned to their conversations. No one reached for drinks. The luxury cabin, usually filled with confident business talk and quiet laughter, had fallen into uneasy silence. And standing near the aisle was Daniel Carter, the flight attendant who still believed he had done the right thing. He adjusted the sleeves of his Navy uniform and forced his breathing to stay steady. In his mind, this situation had been simple. A passenger had ignored instructions. He had responded. End of story. That was how he justified it. because admitting the truth that anger and pride had guided his actions was something he wasn't ready to face. Daniel had worked for Skirich Aviation for almost 3 years. To many people, being a flight attendant might seem like a service job. But to Daniel, luxury aviation meant something far bigger. It meant exclusivity, power, status. Private jet passengers were different from ordinary travelers. They were wealthy executives, investors, celebrities, and corporate leaders. And Daniel secretly enjoyed being part of that world. He wore his uniform proudly. The polished shoes, the company badge, the carefully trained smile. All of it made him feel important. Growing up, Daniel had spent most of his life trying to prove himself. His father, a former military officer, believed discipline solved every problem. Mistakes were weakness. Authority demanded obedience. Praise was rare. You either control situations, his father often said, or situations control you. Daniel carried those lessons into adulthood, and over time, working luxury flights shaped his thinking in dangerous ways. Without realizing it, he had developed his own system for judging people. He never said it aloud, but it guided nearly every interaction. Expensive clothing, luxury accessories, confident posture, assistants carrying luggage. People who looked powerful earned his respect immediately. People who did not, he watched more carefully. And when Amara Johnson arrived at the terminal that morning, she triggered every unfair assumption he carried. Earlier that day, the private terminal buzzed with activity. Luxury SUVs rolled toward the entrance one after another. Executives stepped out wearing tailored suits and designer coats. Drivers unloaded expensive luggage. Assistants checked schedules and carried tablets. Everything looked exactly as Daniel expected. Then he noticed her. Amara entered quietly through the glass terminal doors. No bodyguards. No dramatic arrival. No crowd surrounding her. She wore a neat gray coat and carried a single leather bag over her shoulder. Daniel frowned immediately. She looked composed but ordinary. And in his mind, ordinary did not belong here. He watched her from the service desk. A young airport employee greeted her warmly and appeared ready to escort her personally. But before Daniel could hear their conversation, the employee's radio crackled. The worker hurried away. Daniel never asked what had been discussed. Instead, he filled the silence with assumptions. Maybe she was accompanying a wealthy client. Perhaps she had entered the wrong terminal. Or maybe she worked for someone aboard. Whatever the answer, he convinced himself she did not fit the profile of a Skirich executive passenger. That belief followed him onto the aircraft. Now, standing inside the tense cabin after the confrontation, Daniel glanced toward her. Amara sat quietly beside the window. One hand rested near the faint red mark on her cheek. Her posture remained calm, controlled, and that calmness irritated him. He expected outrage. Most passengers involved in conflict reacted emotionally. They argued loudly, threatened complaints, demanded management. But Amara did none of those things. Instead, she sat silently, almost patiently, and Daniel found that unsettling. A businessman seated near the front finally broke the silence. "You shouldn't have touched her." Daniel looked toward him. His jaw tightened. "Sir, safety protocol requires compliance." The passenger frowned. That didn't look like safety. Daniel forced a polite smile. "With respect, I handle the security concern." The explanation sounded practiced, but the cabin remained unconvinced. A woman seated nearby whispered to her companion, "This feels wrong." Daniel heard her, and irritation stirred again. He hated being questioned, especially in front of passengers. To him, authority depended on confidence. The moment people doubted you, you lost control, and Daniel refused to feel powerless. His mind replayed the confrontation. After boarding, Amara had calmly moved toward the rear section of the aircraft. He intercepted her immediately. "Passenger seating is forward." "I know," she replied politely. "Then please return to your seat. I only need to check something." Her answer annoyed him. "Restricted area. I'll only be a moment." Nearby passengers had already begun watching, and suddenly the situation felt personal, not professional. Personal. His tone sharpened. Ma'am, I'm asking you to comply. Amara met his eyes calmly. And I'm asking you not to assume. The words hit his pride harder than he admitted. Not to assume. Because deep down, he already had. He assumed she lacked authority. Assumed she didn't belong. Assumed he understood her story before learning her name. And instead of stepping back, he pushed harder. Now, sitting by the window, Amara quietly reached into her bag and removed her phone. She typed a short message. No dramatic call. No threats. Just one calm message. Then she placed the phone beside her and looked out the window again. Daniel frowned. A strange feeling settled in his stomach. Why was she so calm? Why didn't she seem afraid? And then, near the middle of the cabin, Mark Reynolds, Vice President of Operations, finally looked up from his tablet. At first, he glanced toward Amara casually. Then his expression changed. The color drained from his face. His coffee nearly slipped from his hand. And suddenly, Daniel felt the first cold wave of fear crawl through him. The cabin felt unnaturally quiet. The soft engine hum beneath the luxury jet was now mixed with something heavier. Tension. After Mark Reynolds stood from his seat, every eye inside the aircraft followed him. His sudden reaction had changed the mood instantly. Only moments earlier, passengers had been whispering about the slap and Daniel's behavior. But now those whispers faded into uneasy silence. Mark moved quickly down the aisle. His face had turned pale, and Daniel noticed it immediately. "Sir," Daniel asked, forcing a professional smile, "is something wrong?" But Mark barely heard him. His eyes remained locked on the woman seated by the window, Amara Johnson. She sat calmly, hands folded in her lap, looking out toward the runway as though nothing unusual had happened. That calmness unsettled everyone. Most people would have reacted with anger after being publicly humiliated. Some would have shouted. Others would have threatened legal action. But Amara remained composed. And somehow, that composure made the situation feel even more serious. Mark reached her row and stopped. For a second, he simply stared. The disbelief in his face shocked nearby passengers. Then he spoke. "Ms. Johnson." The words were quiet, but inside the silent cabin, they sounded loud enough for everyone to hear. Amara slowly turned her head. Her expression remained calm. "Good morning, Mark." The Vice President of Operations swallowed hard. His eyes moved to the faint red mark still visible on her cheek. And the moment he noticed it, his face changed completely. Fear, embarrassment, shock, all at once. "Oh no," he whispered. Passengers exchanged nervous looks. Daniel stepped closer, confusion growing. "Sir?" he asked again. Mark looked up, and the expression in his eyes instantly weakened Daniel's confidence. "Tell me," Mark said carefully, "what happened here?" Daniel straightened his shoulders. His voice carried the same certainty he had relied on all morning. "She attempted to access a restricted area," he explained. "I followed protocol." Several passengers looked skeptical. Mark's eyes narrowed. "And this?" He gestured toward Amara's cheek. Daniel hesitated. She became noncompliant. The explanation sounded weaker the second time. Mark looked stunned. "You slapped her?" Daniel shifted awkwardly. It was a security response. The cabin erupted with quiet murmurs. Even Daniel could hear doubt in his own voice now. Mark stared at him in disbelief. Then he looked back toward Amara. "I'm deeply sorry," he said. She offered a small nod. "You seem surprised to see me." Mark looked uncomfortable. "I didn't know you were boarding this flight personally." Daniel frowned. "Boarding personally? What did that mean?" His stomach tightened. Something suddenly felt wrong. Very wrong. Passengers sensed it too. Several leaned closer. A businessman quietly lowered his newspaper. A woman stopped typing on her laptop. Even crew members standing nearby looked uneasy. Daniel forced a smile. "Sir, with respect, she still violated cabin restrictions." Mark slowly turned toward him. For a long moment, he said nothing, and somehow that silence felt more threatening than anger. Then he asked a question. "Daniel, do you know who you're speaking to?" Daniel blinked. The question irritated him. He hated feeling uninformed in front of passengers. "No," he admitted. Mark inhaled deeply. The hesitation alone made Daniel's pulse quicken. Nearby passengers leaned forward, and when Mark finally answered, the entire cabin seemed to freeze. "This is Amara Johnson." Daniel looked confused. The name meant nothing to him. Mark continued, "Founder of Skirich Aviation." Daniel stared. No reaction. His mind struggled to connect the words. Then Mark added the sentence that changed everything. "And majority owner of this company." Silence. Absolute silence. The words landed like a bomb. Several passengers gasped. One executive muttered, "Oh my God!" A phone slipped from someone's hand onto the carpeted floor. Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. Owner? No, that couldn't be right. He looked at Amara again. The simple gray coat. The modest bag. No jewelry. No bodyguards. Nothing about her matched the picture he had built in his head. And suddenly, that realization hit him harder than anything else. He had never actually asked. He had assumed. Mark quickly opened his tablet. His hand shook slightly. Within seconds, he pulled up the company leadership page and turned the screen toward Daniel. There she was. Same face. Same calm eyes. Same woman. Corporate portrait. Chairwoman and founder. Amara Johnson. Daniel's mouth went dry. His breathing slowed. The confidence that had carried him moments earlier vanished completely. Passengers watched his expression change. Some shook their heads. Others looked disgusted. And still, Amara remained calm. She met Daniel's eyes without hostility. No shouting. No dramatic satisfaction. Only disappointment. That disappointed look hurt more than rage. Daniel suddenly felt small. His mind replayed the confrontation again. The blocked path. The harsh tone. The accusations. And then, the slap. His stomach twisted. He began, but the words refused to come. Mark looked furious now. "Do you understand what you've done?" Daniel swallowed. The cabin suddenly felt too warm, too crowded. He looked toward Amara again, desperate to read her expression, but she gave nothing away. Only silence. And somehow, that silence frightened him more than punishment ever could, because for the first time that morning, Daniel realized this was no longer a disagreement with a passenger. This was the moment his entire career began collapsing in front of him. The luxury jet had become painfully silent. No one checked emails anymore. No one discussed business meetings. The elegant cabin that once felt powerful and exclusive now felt trapped beneath a cloud of tension. And at the center of that silence stood Daniel Carter. His face had gone pale. The confidence he wore like part of his uniform had disappeared. Only minutes earlier, he believed he controlled the situation. Now, he struggled to breathe normally. Across from him stood Amara Johnson, the woman he had judged, humiliated, and slapped, and the owner of the company. Daniel looked again at the tablet in Mark Reynolds' hands. The company leadership page still glowed on the screen. Amara Johnson, founder and majority owner. Skirich Aviation. The image matched perfectly. Same composed expression. Same sharp eyes. Same woman. There was no misunderstanding. No mistake. The truth stood directly in front of him. Around the cabin, passengers whispered quietly. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others stared openly. A few continued recording on their phones. The atmosphere felt suffocating. Daniel finally found his voice. "Ms. Johnson, I didn't know." His words came out weak. Amara looked at him calmly. "That's true," she said. Daniel swallowed. Relief flickered briefly inside him. Maybe she understood. Maybe this could still be fixed. He stepped closer. "If I had known." Her voice interrupted him immediately. "That's the problem." The cabin grew still again. Daniel stopped moving. Amara stood slowly from her seat. Her movements remained calm and controlled. No anger. No shouting. And somehow that calm authority made everyone listen even more carefully. She adjusted her coat and faced him. "You didn't know," she repeated softly. "And because you didn't know, you decided I deserve less respect." The words hit harder than Daniel expected. His mouth opened. "I was enforcing policy." "No." Her tone stayed measured but firm. "You were enforcing assumptions." The sentence cut through the cabin. Nobody moved. Daniel felt heat rise to his face. He wanted to defend himself, wanted to explain, but deep down, he knew she was right, because he had judged her long before she reached the aircraft. He remembered every detail now. The simple coat, the small travel bag, the lack of luxury. He had created a story about her in his mind without asking a single question, and once that story formed, everything she did looked suspicious to him. Passengers watched silently as realization spread across Daniel's face. Near the front of the cabin, one businessman quietly muttered, "That's exactly what happened." Another passenger nodded. Mark Reynolds looked deeply embarrassed. As vice president of operations, this disaster reflected badly on leadership too. He rubbed his forehead. "Ms. Johnson, I sincerely apologize for this failure." Amara glanced toward him. "I'm not interested in rehearsed apologies, Mark." The words were calm but sharp. Mark lowered his eyes. The owner looked around the cabin. Her gaze moved over the passengers, then toward the flight crew standing nervously nearby. Fear had spread among them. Some avoided eye contact. Others looked shocked. Daniel noticed their expressions and panic tightened in his chest. For the first time, he understood how serious this had become. Amara spoke again. Skirich was built differently. Her voice carried quiet authority. "When I founded this company, I promised something simple: professionalism, dignity, and equal treatment." The cabin remained silent. "I didn't build this business so people could be judged by appearance." Daniel looked desperate. "I made a mistake." She looked at him. "Yes." The single word hurt. He took another step forward. "I lost control. I understand that now." Passengers watched carefully. For a brief moment, it seemed possible she might forgive him, but Amara's expression never changed. "You didn't lose control," she said. "You used it." The sentence hit the cabin like cold air. Daniel froze. Because again, she was right. The slap had not been accidental. It had been deliberate, an abuse of authority. And now there was no escaping that truth. Amara reached into her bag and removed her phone. Daniel's pulse quickened. Nearby crew exchanged nervous glances. She unlocked the screen and calmly dialed a number. The room felt suspended in time. Within moments, the call connected. A large monitor near the forward cabin lit up. Corporate headquarters appeared on screen. Several senior executives looked surprised. "Ms. Johnson?" one executive asked. Mark immediately straightened. The executives could already sense something was wrong. Amara stood beneath the cabin lights, composed and unmistakably in command. "I need immediate executive review," she said. The screen grew quiet. She continued. "A physical assault occurred aboard this aircraft involving onboard staff and supervisory failure." Shock spread across the faces on screen. Mark looked sick. Passengers listened closely. Daniel felt his throat tighten. One executive asked carefully, "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Amara replied. Then she added something that made Daniel's stomach drop. "But this company is not." Silence followed. The executives waited. Amara spoke clearly. "Effective immediately. I want a full investigation opened." Daniel stared at her. "No, surely not." She continued. "This onboard service team and all responsible supervisors are suspended pending review." Gasps filled the cabin. Crew members looked horrified. Daniel's knees felt weak. The words echoed inside his mind. Suspended. His career suddenly hung by a thread. He stepped forward in desperation. "Please, Ms. Johnson, I can explain." She slowly turned toward him. Her eyes were calm. No hatred, no revenge, and somehow that made her next words even harder to hear. "You already did." The silence that followed felt endless. And in that terrible moment, Daniel realized the consequences of his actions had only just begun. The private jet never left the runway that morning. Outside, airport crews continued moving beneath the rising sun, unaware that inside the aircraft, careers and reputations had already changed forever. Inside the cabin, the silence felt heavy. After Amara Johnson announced a suspension and corporate investigators took control of the situation, no one knew what to say. Passengers sat quietly. Crew members avoided eye contact. And standing near the aisle, Daniel Carter looked like a man watching his entire world collapse. Only 20 minutes earlier, He had boarded the flight feeling confident and respected. Now that confidence had vanished. His uniform suddenly felt heavier. The polished badge on his chest no longer represented pride. It felt like a reminder of failure. Corporate security arrived first. 2 company representatives boarded the aircraft and quietly escorted the remaining service staff toward the exit. No shouting, no dramatic confrontation, only tense silence. Passengers watched carefully as events unfolded. Some continued recording. Others looked uncomfortable. Daniel remained frozen beside the galley. His thoughts raced uncontrollably. He replayed every moment again and again. The first glance at Amara, the assumptions, the harsh tone, the blocked pathway, and finally, the slap. The memory made his stomach twist. For the first time that morning, he fully understood what he had done. Not merely a professional mistake, a moral one. Mark Reynolds stood nearby speaking with investigators, his face still pale with embarrassment. As vice president of operations, the incident reflected badly on company leadership, and he knew it. He approached Amara carefully. "Ms. Johnson," he said quietly, "replacement crew are arriving now." She nodded. The faint mark on her cheek remained visible beneath the cabin lights. Yet her posture stayed calm, composed. That calm authority continued to affect everyone around her. Most people expected rage after humiliation, but Amara carried herself differently, not because she felt nothing, but because she understood something larger was at stake. Passengers watched her closely. One elderly investor finally spoke. "I've flown private for 20 years, he said softly. "I've never seen anything like this." Amara looked toward him. "Unfortunately," she replied, "many people experience moments like this every day." The cabin fell silent again. Her words lingered, and several passengers quietly lowered their eyes, because they understood exactly what she meant. Not everyone carried power. Not everyone owned companies. Most people facing disrespect or unfair treatment had no executive title to protect them, no corporate influence, no audience, only silence. And that realization made the incident feel far bigger than one flight. Meanwhile, Daniel stood motionless. Fear and regret battled inside him. He wanted to speak again, wanted another chance to apologize. But every time he looked toward Amara, shame stopped him. Eventually, investigators approached him. "Mr. Carter," one representative said, "we need you to come with us." His throat tightened. Passengers watched as he slowly removed his company identification badge. The small metallic sound of the badge leaving his uniform felt painfully final. For years, he had worn it proudly. Now it rested cold in his hand. He looked toward Amara one last time. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. And this time, the apology sounded real. Not defensive, not desperate, just broken. Amara studied him for a moment. Then she answered honestly, "I hope you are." The words carried no cruelty, only truth. Daniel lowered his head, and without another word, he followed investigators off the aircraft. The cabin remained silent long after he disappeared. Eventually, replacement crew arrived and prepared the jet for departure. But before takeoff, Amara made an unexpected decision. She requested a company-wide meeting later that afternoon. Thousands of Skirich employees joined virtually from offices and airports across the country. Many expected anger. Some expected public punishment. Instead, Amara stood before the company and spoke with calm honesty. Behind her, company logos glowed softly across the conference screen. "This morning," she began, "an incident occurred aboard one of our aircraft." Employees listened carefully. She touched her cheek briefly, not dramatically, simply acknowledging what happened. "Some people may view this as an isolated event," she continued. "I do not." The room remained silent. "This is not about revenge." Her words surprised many. "It is about culture." Across the company network, thousands watched. Flight crews, executives, ground staff, managers, and Amara spoke directly to all of them. "When respect depends on appearance, wealth, race, or status," she said, "professionalism has already failed." The message spread quickly. Clips from the meeting appeared online. Passengers shared their recordings. News outlets began reporting the story. But what caught public attention most was not punishment. It was Amar's response. She announced immediate reforms: mandatory bias and professionalism training, stronger accountability systems, independent complaint review procedures, clearer protections for passengers and employees alike. Her goal was not humiliation. It was change. And for many Skirich workers, the meeting became a turning point, a reminder that leadership meant more than authority. It meant responsibility. Days later, headlines continued spreading across social media. People debated the incident everywhere, but one image remained unforgettable: the quiet woman in the gray coat standing calmly inside her own jet. And for Daniel Carter, the memory never disappeared. Because 10 minutes after he judged someone by appearance and believed power belonged only to certain people, he learned a lesson he would never forget. The woman he dismissed was not simply the owner of the company. She was proof that respect should never depend on who someone appears to be. And sometimes, the greatest fall begins with one dangerous assumption: the end.